Just a couple of years ago, Donald Trump supported recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel rather than Tel Aviv, which previous administrations had done. Now, he gave reasons at the time for why he did that, but yesterday, speaking about that decision, the reasons were a little bit different. Take a look.
And we moved the capital of Israel to Jerusalem. That's for the evangelicals. You know, it's amazing with that. The evangelicals are more excited about that than Jewish people. It's really, right? It's incredible.
It is incredible. It's incredible that he said that, because obviously that's why. If you know anything about evangelical Christianity, their beliefs about the end times and millennialism and all of that, this is a thing that they have wanted, but past Republicans and even Trump at the time had explained it as being what's best for Israel and America and the Palestinians somehow, despite what all the people in the area would say. He said that was the reason. Now he's acknowledging, no, it's because of American evangelicals that he made this potentially dangerous choice.
Yeah, and we kind of mentioned earlier that this is kind of in my wheelhouse as far as the kind of videos that I do. But I have actually been hesitant to do a video on Israel and Palestine for a long time because, first of all, it's so complex. There's so many layers to it, but also people get really, really passionate about it to the point where it almost doesn't make sense to me. I remember in 9th grade, world geography, we had a mock trial, Palestine versus Israel. I don't know, it seems very progressive for a 9th grade in public school, but we did it. And I mean, within maybe 10 minutes of this mock trial happening, and we had been preparing for it for a week at that point, both sides, everything just fell apart. The Israel side called Jesus up to the stand, and that was it. We were just like, where do we go from here? But the thing with this particular, peace deal, if you want to call it that. First of all, they keep talking about peace in the Middle East as if that's even a thing. It's not. They make it sound like there's a bunch of Arab people sitting on a peninsula fighting with one another, but they're forgetting to mention that there's so many other powers working there, and that's why it's so unstable. There's the US, there's Russia, there's China, there's the UK, the UN, the EU, then there's all the oil and gas companies that are over there. Then there's all these smaller rebel groups that don't necessarily work in compliance or allegiance with the countries that they're living within, right? So there's so many things going on in this one region. And then on top of that, there's a history of how we got to this point, which is also very, very complex. But I was watching an interview with a professor over at Johns Hopkins, and he's an expert on all this, and he made a really, really good point. What he said was that Donald Trump hasn't really had a successful foreign policy win. He's had a lot of near wins, a lot of things that sounded good but didn't actually do a whole lot. North Korea, haven't really heard a whole lot since the last time we heard about that, which feels like 15 years ago. But he needed a win, and this feels and sounds like a win, even though it really probably won't change very much from what's already happening over there. The UAE was always kind of friendly with Israel and Saudi Arabia, and if you know, Saudi Arabia is allied with the US and they're in opposition to Iran. So there's so many different things going on. It's not the win that they want it to be, or they're trying to make it sound like it is, but it is going to be favorable with those evangelicals, and he needs that vote.
I think you're right. He does need a perceived win, and you're also right that it's complicated. So many different groups and factions involved in this, which is why I think it's probably most responsible to just let American evangelicals decide what our decisions will be made in the Middle East. But anyway, I want to give people a few details about the deals. The US, Israel, and the UAE put out a joint statement outlining how the two Middle Eastern nations will develop ties in numerous areas, including investment, security, tourism, technology, and energy, and will establish formal embassies in each other's countries. Israel will, quote, suspend declaring sovereignty over parts of the West Bank that it had previously expressed interest to annex. In exchange, the UAE will treat Israel as it would any other country it has friendly relations with, making it only the third Arab country to have such open relations with Jerusalem. Now, for the most part, the bounds of the deal sound okay. The question will be how much they will actually be followed, because Israel has made any number of promises about not taking territory that they've then gone back on. So The question will they be more likely to follow the bounds of a deal with the UAE than they have been with previous agreements with the United States? Tune in to see. But we do have to just briefly acknowledge that some of the talk about the deal has seemed a little bit odd, including this quote from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which had been posted and then taken down for reasons that'll become obvious, when he said, the deal connects the UAE with Israel. Both of them are advanced democracies and their societies are advanced. UAE might be advanced. It's not an advanced democracy. It's a hereditary monarchy where political freedoms are very limited. And I get that you're gonna say nice things about the country you just made a deal with, but they don't suddenly become a representative democracy because you have enhanced trade relations with them. That's not how it actually works.
I mean, even Israel is arguable as far as their democratic policies and the way that they function. And it is important to note that, well, you mentioned it earlier, just because Israel, like the shining beacon of all of this seems to be that Israel will not illegally annex parts of Palestine into their country. It was already illegal, you're not supposed to do this in the first place. And they've been doing it. They've been having all these illegal settlements in Palestine. The Palestinians cannot fight back. And it's just like, why would we believe you? Just because you said it this time, it's like, well, you're going to anyway. So it's just a matter of time.
We have a comment from Hanan Ashrawi, a member of the executive committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization that had similar elements to what you were saying Israel got rewarded for not declaring openly what it's been doing to Palestine illegally and persistently since the beginning of this occupation. The UAE has come out in the open on its secret dealings and normalization with Israel. Please don't do us a favor. We are nobody's fig leaf. Yeah. And so, I would imagine, I haven't watched a ton of American cable news analysis of this deal, but I would imagine the concerns and fears of Palestinians are probably not being put front and center when it comes to what this deal is going to do to the status quo there, let alone what America's contribution to that situation has been, including in things like earlier when we were talking about recognizing the capital being Jerusalem.
Yeah, I mean, Americans really, the minute that you speak out in a pro-Palestine way, no matter how objectively you try to look at the situation, it's never received well. Which is, like I think I said earlier, I never really understood it fully, aside from just Semitism and just general being pro-Israel or anti-Israel or whatever, but it's not about being pro or anti any of it. It's about what the law is, it's what parameters are put in place, and these are the parameters that are not being abided against, and that's it, You were told not to do this, you agreed to it, and then you did it anyway. So why is it a problem to say you shouldn't have done that?
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.